My Dad's a Birdman, Chapter 8. He belted round the room like the bag was dragging him after it. It lurched into the air and jittering down to the ground again. He held it tight. His hair flew round his head. His eyes were weird and wild and excited. Once he opened and tried to look inside the bag, but he snapped it shut again and he yelled, "Ouch! Get off!" "I'm just trying to get a look at you." And the bag set off again, dragging him after it. He stopped again. He held the flapping thing in his face. "Calm down," he said. "Would you like a worm?" But he just squawked. He just squawked and squealed and crackled and flapped, and Dad set off the room again, running after again. Auntie Doreen stood in front of the dumplings. Lizzie stood stock still in amazement. "What on earth are you doing?" said Auntie Doreen at last. "I caught the crow," yelled Dad. "You caught the crow? Pumpety pump. What are you doing catching a crow?" "It's for research," said Dad. "I want to inspect it and see where I'm going wrong." "Ouch! Ow!" "Calm down, you daft bird." "Let it go, Jackie, man," said Auntie Doreen. "It's cruel, Dad," said Lizzie. "Ouch!" said Dad. "Oh! I don't mean any harm, Lizzie." He held it up to his face again. "I want to be your friend," he whispered. But the crow didn't want to be his. It pecked through the bag, and its big grey beak jittered out and pecked at Dad's pink nose. Its whole head appeared, and it glared out with angry, marbly, beady eyes. "Hello, crow," said Dad. "I just want to—" But it stabbed his cheeks with its beak. It squawked and cawed and flapped. Auntie Doreen screamed in fright. "Get rid of it, man," she yelled. "Get it out before it attacks us." Dad ran to the door and flung the bag and the bird to the sky. The bag dropped back and fell onto Dad's head and rested there. "Bye now, crow," he yelled. "Jackie," said Aunt Doreen. "Eh?" said Dad. "Have a dumpling." "Huh?" he said. She lobbed a dumpling at him. "Have a blooming dumpling," she said. He caught it, looked at it, smelt it, then threw it out the door. "It was a lovely bird," he said. "What you did was cruel," said Lizzie. "It was looking at me like it wanted to be my pal." Dad continued. "It smiled at me." "Dad," said Lizzie, "it was cruel. Do you think so, Lizzie?" He pondered. "I suppose it didn't really seem too chuffed." "Dumpling," said Auntie Doreen. She lobbed another one at him. He stepped out of the way, and he went sailing out of the door and bounced across the garden. She glared at him. "Right," she said. "Enough's enough. That's it." She put her hat back on. She dusted the flour off her hands. "Elizabeth, your coat. You're coming with me." But Lizzie ignored Auntie Doreen and went on her dad's side. "You could just watch the birds, Dad," she said. "You can look at them in the garden. You can make notes and drawings. You don't need to catch them, do you?" He looked at the ground. "Suppose not," he muttered. She pointed into the sky at a crow that was flapping over the garden. "Look at that crow," she said. "Can you see there's feathers sticking out like fingers at the back of the wings? You haven't got them on your wings, have you?" "No, I haven't," she said. Lizzie snapped. "Lizzie!" snapped Auntie Doreen. "Come here!" But Lizzie wasn't listening. She pointed into the sky again. "And look at that lovely little wren," she said. "Oh, and listen to the songs, Dad." They looked and listened together. There were birds in the sky and in the tree. There were birds on rooftops and walls and chimney pots, and their singing was everywhere, and it was so beautiful. "Aren't they lovely?" said Lizzie. "Just lovely," said Dad. They listened together. Then he whistled, and the bird whistled back. He called, and a bird called back. "You're so clever, Dad," murmured Lizzie. "Elizabeth," snapped Auntie Doreen, "get your coat on now." "Oh, and look," said Lizzie. "Can you see those two little sparrows?" Dad smiled. Auntie Doreen just watched, didn't know what to say. "Hey," he said. "Look, there's another one. 3 little sparrows." They watched the sparrows hopping across They watched the sparrows hopping across the garden. There's a whole little family of them. And look at them, swallows, said Lizzie. Look how they've got little pointy feathers on their tails. You haven't got them, have you? Dad shook his head. Maybe you just need some work on the wings. Dad, a twist here, an extra feather there, and you'll be up and away. She gave him a cuddle. Hey, Dad, she said, maybe I can help you. Dad's eyes widened. He grinned. He was overjoyed. Would you really help us? He said. She smiled. Of course you would help. It'd be like when she'd help them paint the playhouse, or when she'd help put the final touches to the puppets. It'd be like when they planted. It'd be like when they planted that little ash tree in the garden together, when Dad had said they made a great team. Course I would, she said. You're my dad, aren't you? Dad laughed. We're a great team, he said. He picked Lizzie up and held her above his head. He set off running round the room and holding her up like she was flying, and Lizzie laughed and laughed, and she yelled, Are my feet off the floor yet? They are. Auntie Doreen stamped her feet. Put that girl down, she yelled. But Auntie Doreen laughed. But Auntie Doreen, laughed Lizzie, it's fun. Auntie Doreen put her hat on. She took a big bite of a dumpling. She stamped towards the door. Oh, Lizzie, don't go, Auntie Doreen. I am leaving this madhouse, Jackie, said Auntie Doreen. Elizabeth, this is your very last chance. Come with me now. Dad lowered Lizzie to the floor. Lizzie didn't move. She didn't want Auntie Doreen to go off in a huff, but she couldn't leave her dad. She shook her head. See what you've done to that girl, said Auntie Doreen. Lizzie laughed. I'm all right, she said. She smiled at Auntie Doreen, then at Dad. Maybe I'll even enter the competition myself. Maybe I'll make wings for myself. We'll enter together, said Dad. We'll be a family of human birds. Let's get started, said Lizzie, and they ran out together in the garden. They started gathering feathers from under the trees. Auntie Doreen stamped out of the door. Maybe. Bye-bye, Auntie Doreen, shouted Lizzie. Bye-bye, Doreen, shouted Dad. I'll bye-bye you, snapped Auntie Doreen. She stamped down the garden, through the gate, and slammed it behind her. I'll be back, she said, and I'll bring somebody that'll clip your wings. Chapter 9. Lizzie and her dad worked all day into the night, gathering feathers and strings and thread and bits and bobs and coat hangers and ribbons and buttons and beads. They stitched and snipped and stuck. But the next morning, Lizzie's wings and her beak and her crest were just about done. Lizzie and Dad stood together at the door, both of them wearing their wings. They were worn out, but they were so happy, so proud of themselves. Lizzie leaned on her dad and said he was right. They were a fantastic team. Brilliant sunlight slanted over the rooftops. And through the trees and onto their happy and excited faces. Birds tweeted and whistled all around. The city traffic rumbled and roared. Dad giggled as he thought of what they could do next. We need a nest, Lizzie, he said. A nest? Hey, I'll make it all proper, to make us like proper birds. Lizzie looked into his eyes. Go on, he said. It'll make me happy. She smiled and shrugged and said, Okay, Dad, what'll we need? Well, they need grass and twigs and straw and leaves and string and ripped up tea towels and bits of shirts and bits of old jumper and dusters and holey socks and feathers and carpet fluff. They carried all the bits and pieces into the kitchen, and they knelt on the floor and put everything together into the shape of a nest. Lizzie smiled and hummed as they worked. Dad tweeted and whistled and cawed. Isn't it lovely, he said. A proper little home for us. He reached into his pocket and found a worm. He held it up and let it dangle from his fingers. Then he gobbed it up. Would you like one, Lizzie? She shook her head. I'll have these instead, she said, and she nibbled some peanuts. Dad stood up on tiptoes and stretched his wings up high and pulled his tummy in. "Look," he said, "I'm getting skinnier already." "You can't be," she laughed. But when she looked more closely, it seemed as if he really was. She poked him and called him tin ribs. "I'll soon be light as a feather," he said. They went on working carefully and shaping the nest into a ring with a deep hollow at the centre. Birds in the best in the world at looking after their little uns, you know," said Dad. "They bring them up good and strong. They protect them from all dangers." They worked on until at last it was finished. They stepped into it and sat there wearing their lovely wings in their homemade nest in the corner of the kitchen, and they beamed with joy. Dad giggled and wiggled his bottom. "Ooh," he said, "I feel an egg coming out." He laid an imaginary egg. He reached underneath himself, picked it up and held it in the air between their faces. "Lizzie, look!" Lizzie took it from his hands. She said it was beautiful. The bright blue shell, the dappled brown markings on it. Then she gave it back and he put it into the nest again. "Now I'll sit on it till it hatches," he said. He closed his eyes and concentrated. "Come on, little chick," he whispered. He jumped up. "It worked!" He picked up the imaginary chick and cupped it in his hands and held it to his face. "Hello, little un," he said. "Isn't he lovely, Lizzie?" Lizzie gazed down into Dad's hands and smiled. She smiled. "He's so gorgeous," she said, and she reached down and touched and stroked the imaginary chick. Then Dad opened his hands and raised them. "He's growing up already," he said. "Off you go, fly away." The imaginary bird flew from them. Dad pointed around the room and they pretended to see the brand new bird flying there. There, he see? See? Lizzie giggled. "Silly man," she said. "Anyway, it's the mams that lay the eggs, not the dads." "Hey, you're right," said Dad. But he went on pointing and waving until the imaginary chick flew right away. "Bye-bye," he said. "Bye-bye, lovely little un." Then they sat silently in the nest again, and the afternoon moved on, and they dozed and dreamed their dreams of flying. "I could sit here forever," said Dad. "Just me and you." But he suddenly jumped up. "But no time for that. There's a competition to think about. Let's get them tails and feathers and crests done, Lizzie." So they set to work again. Lizzie watched. "No time for that. There's a competition to think about. Let's get them feathers and beaks and crests done, Lizzie." So they set for work again. Lizzie watched her dad, and after a while she said, "Dad, what is love?" "Well," she said, "we have to realize even with the tail feathers and the beaks and the crest, it might still not work." Said Dad. He blinked and shook his head like he didn't understand her, or like he didn't want to understand her. "But even if it doesn't work," said Lizzie, "it won't really matter. Even if we end up getting fished out of the river, it won't really matter, will it, Dad?" Dad blinked again and stared at her. He gobbled a worm. He rustled his wings. "Tweet, tweet," he said. Lizzie shook his arm. "You understand, don't you?" she said. "It might not work, but whatever happens, we'll have done it together, won't we, Dad? That's what really matters." Dad jumped up and started running around the room, flapping his wings. "Caw, caw," he yelled. "Caw, caw." "Dad," said Lizzie, "are you listening to me?" Then there was a final yell from outside. "Final entries for the human bird competition." Lizzie and Dad stood dead still. It came again. "Any more entries for the great human bird competition?" Dad opened the door, and there's a chubby little Mr. Poop outside the gate with his megaphone and his clipboard. "Any more entries for—" "Hey!" shouted Dad. "In here, Mr. Poop."